Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we are going to be previewing Jaden Ivey's third season in the NBA and with the Detroit Pistons. But before we get to that, I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me over on Twitter at Pistons_Jack. You can also follow us over on Instagram, TikTok, and of course here on YouTube at Pistons_Jack. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Please hit that like button. I appreciate all support, all the love. We're only 5 weeks away from opening night, and I cannot wait for that opening game. Got some really exciting news to come on this channel in the coming weeks. But for the moment, stick with me, and I hope you enjoy this player preview series. As I mentioned, doing Jaden Ivey today, and like in my previous two videos with Asar Thompson and Ron Holland, which you can go check out, we'll break it down into 4 parts. First, we'll recap Jaden's season last year and the ongoings there and how that all played out. Then we'll go through what I think Jaden Ivey's role will be on the Detroit Pistons this season. We'll then talk about an area for improvement in which I think will help Jaden's games the most for this season. And finally, I'll close it out with a bit of a hot take. But Jaden Ivey, I guess we'll start with last season. Funny season. It was up and down. It was an absolute roller coaster. His season, within what was a disastrous season overall, was one of the more bizarre storylines in the usage of him, the different roles he played, and then ultimately towards the end, kind of how he closed the season on a bit of a disappointing note. But I think we'll start from the start. The red flags were there early, even if we weren't aware of them, like myself with Monty Williams. But when Jaden Ivey came off the bench to start the season behind Killian Hayes, he actually played some of his better basketball. I think he only ended up coming off the bench like 15 times, but considering it was behind Killian Hayes, and no shade to Killian, but Jaden Ivey is just flat out a much better player than Killian Hayes. And like with the investment you have in Ivey, it really made no sense. My whole gripe with that entire issue was, although I thought Jaden should have been starting, if you wanted to start maybe someone ahead of him that was a better three-point shooter and was solid defensively, I'd get it because that would help Cade more. But you're starting kind of a guard that shrinks the court even more, can't hit a shot, and frankly, he's better than Ivey defensively, but really was one of the worst offensive players in the league. And Killian Hayes, you're putting him alongside Cade, you're putting him in a starting lineup that already has spacing issues. It was a bizarre decision. And from that point on, whilst Jaden played pretty well as coming off the bench, his season was very up and down. I'm not sure what Monty Williams was trying to do with Jaden. I think it was the tough love kind of route, but it just felt like he never had an investment in Ivey. It even got to the point where Monty said himself that he had a meeting with kind of some of the ownership group and the management, and they brought up that he needs to play Ivey more, and he admitted that was a mistake of his, and just so many weird things. But Jaden himself, as you can see, he averaged 15, 3, 4 assists, 43% from the field, and 34% from three. Kind of, not the season I think any of us expected, but if anything, it was a bit of a step back from a rookie season, I thought. He struggled to hit open threes. And most importantly, and I'll get to this later, but after playing pretty much his whole rookie season without Cade, Jaden really struggled to play well alongside Cade. But he did have a really, really hot patch around end of Jan, or I think it was around February, around the trade deadline before All-Star break, where he scored a career high 37 points against the Kings, and then backed that up with another game against the Blazers where he went 7 of 7 from three. And he kind of got on this little heater for like 10 games from three. But and I think the encouraging thing out of that 10-game stretch, whilst it was not long enough, it kind of showed you the dynamic player he can be when the shot's falling. And one of the areas he needs to improve is his finishing around the rim. But when that three-point shot is falling, he is a real problem offensively, at least in my opinion, just with his downhill speed, his ability to drive and kick and open things up. Like that's I think the Jaden Ivey we all envision as like a really high outcome for him. But unfortunately, he could only really have that 10-game stretch where he shot it extremely well, probably at an unsustainable level as we saw. But closing out on his second season in the league, he kind of the thing for me, which left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, and it's not something that has me ultimately low on him overall as a player, but in the last 8 to 10 games where I believe Cade was out, Duran was out, might even just been the last 5 to 6 games, but it was pretty much just Jaden left with some of the two-way guys and the parts left over from last year's team. He just didn't really have a statement game. Sometimes I forgot he was on the floor, and it's not that I expected him to drop 30 or 25 each night, but he just didn't really have. He had one good first half against the Grizzlies where I think he scored like 20, but apart from that, he just really struggled to put a complete game together to close the season. And I don't think we heard anything about an injury, but maybe he just wanted the season done. But it was a little slight concern of mine. That's just the way he closed the season wasn't very strong. But a weird year 2 for Ivy. I don't think it's crazy to say it was a step back. And as we move on here to kind of the role for this upcoming season, unless you've been living under a rock, the Pistons got rid of Monty Williams. So there's a new coach in JB Bickerstaff, which gives Jaden a clean slate. His third coach in 3 years, but no less, it's a clean slate for him to come in and kind of impress JB Bickerstaff. And, I ultimately think Jaden starts to open the season. I have him in my starting lineup alongside Cade in that backcourt. And I think a lot of people either have him in the starting lineup or they have him as the backup point guard, which I see the thinking behind that, but I also think he can still play as the backup point guard when they mix and match him and Cade's minutes, so one of them's always on the floor. But I have him as a starter, and I think primarily that's because you want to, and I know you can do this with him as a backup. So whilst this argument isn't like 100% foolproof, like I just think that you want to see him start games along Cade and you want to see him start third quarters alongside Cade because you've invested the 5th pick in him and he's in his 3rd season. He's extension eligible this offseason, which even if he plays well, doesn't mean he's getting extension. Can go into the following summer. But I think Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duran, but even more Ivey, just because of the struggles he's had to fit with Cade thus far. I think you really need to figure out if he can play major minutes alongside Cade and how that looks, because if he can figure it out offensively with Cade, then defensively, you might have to retool your roster to make sure that you can cover for them, because no matter what, I know Jaden has the physical tools to be an average defender in the league, and I know Cade has tools to be probably a good defender in this league. If they're going to be your 2 primary offensive guys, I just don't think it's sustainable to think that they're both going to be locked down defensively. Maybe I'm wrong, but if they do figure it out offensively, you need to probably cater the roster to make sure that surrounding them is the right parts. So those are just some of the reasons I think he should start at least in the beginning, see how it goes, because you have such an investment in him. Even if it is a new front office, Jaden Ivey's a guy that if things are going well, he does, like the 5th overall pick in their 3rd season still has that kind of blue chip kind of value. And especially a player like Ivey, who many at the time of that draft had him in that top 3. Not a lot had him ahead of Chet Holmgren or even Paolo, but I feel like Ivey was right there with Jabari Smith. And he was kind of in that top 4. If anything, he was meant to be that 4th pick to the Kings. Some things played out there, and Keegan Murray went 4th, who looks like a really good player as well. But Jaden I still feel like he would have value around the league as much as he struggled in Detroit. You could point to a really poor situation. I can definitely see how teams could talk themselves into Ivy. So I think the Pistons this season really need to figure out who he is. And I think that starts with playing him alongside Cade Cunningham as much as you can. I'm not saying 48 minutes a night, but I think starting him and having him start games and start third quarters and potentially closing games alongside Cade, if you do that consistently, you're going to get a good understanding. And if it doesn't work, you put him to the bench and he can come off and be that microwave scorer. And maybe that's who he is. I've heard people say maybe he's just Malik Monk, and there are some comparisons between those two. But I still think he can be a starting guard. I still think he can be a 20-point per game scorer on a really good team in this league. But he has a lot to prove this season. And I think it's going to, whilst he's in Detroit, he's going to need to show he can do it alongside Cade. But that kind of ties me into his biggest area for improvement into this season. So for me, it's, can you coexist alongside another ball-dominant guard? I don't think on this Pistons roster with Cade Cunningham, there's ever a world where Jaden Ivey is going to be the point guard. alongside Cade. Cade is the point guard. He's the lead initiator, whatever you want to call it. So Jaden needs to figure out, and the Pistons need to see if he can play off and be efficient alongside Cade Cunningham, because he kind of showed the ability as a rookie to knock down open threes, to knock down open catch and shoot threes. But unfortunately, he didn't do any of that really alongside Cade. And he looked his best last season when Cade was out of the lineup. Like, for instance, that 37-point game against the Kings, that was when Cade was out of the lineup. Now, he did have some really solid games with Cade there, including a game where they both scored 30 against the Nets and actually won. But those games were just too few and far between. And I think for me, it's, can Jaden thrive without the ball? Because we saw him as a rookie and we saw him in stretches last year without Cade that he can play really well with the ball in his hands. But ultimately, I think the clear investments in Cade Cunningham has been the lead ball handler. So Jaden has to figure out if he can excel off a guy like Cade. Because if he can't, then I think it's honestly best for both parties, for Ivey's camp and the Pistons, as much as it might hurt me, to go to find a new team where he can be that lead point guard, where they're going to invest in him there. And that will be the best for his career. And the Pistons can maybe get something back because of that 5th pick stature and the potential he has. So in terms of that for me is the number one thing. And I think what extends from that is clearly he has to be able to hit open threes. So I think last year he shot below like 30% from open catch and shoot threes, which is just not high enough. Like, that needs to be closer to 40, at least high 30s. And catch and shoot threes overall needs to get back to where it was as a rookie. I think as well, I would like to see him do more off ball, more Iverson cuts, more backdoor cuts, just be more active offensive when the ball's on his hands. There's a lot of times, and this is also on the coaching staff, so it'd be interesting to see how JB Bickerstaff utilizes him, but there's a lot of times where Jaden just stood in the corner. I don't put every ounce of blame on that on the coaching staff. I think at times players can, we can scapegoat them a little bit by blaming the coach for everything, but there was no denying that he wasn't utilized correctly for large stretches of last season. So being more of an off-ball threat and then knocking down those threes. Finishing at the rim is also a major thing. And I think for what was really enjoyable about him as a rookie was some of his finishing at the rim. I think that kind of tapered off last season. So just finishing those easy ones at the bucket. I think getting to the free throw line is not much of a huge issue for him. But yeah, and then look, I could talk about defensively, but I think that's not number one for me. I've kind of listed my things there. So in terms of my hot take, struggled with this one. And I came up with this. And maybe this isn't a hot take, but I kind of feel like it is with where the fan base is with Jaden right now. He averages the second most points on the team behind Cade. But the key thing here is he averages more than 20 a game. So that would be a 5-point jump. He pretty much, as a rookie, averaged 16 and 15 last season. So he's pretty much going to jump by 4 to 5 points this season. And I think he starts every game he plays. So over 20 points per game, second on the team in scoring per night, and he starts every game he plays. Unless it's like he gets injured, comes back, comes off the bench for the first game. Like, you get the gist. Like, he starts every game he should. That isn't due to injury or that kind of thing. So that's my hot take. I'm not sure it's spicy enough. I did want to say lead the team in scoring, but I just think that's not even realistic. I think Cade is still capable of going to another level as a scorer this year. It's going to be interesting to see Cade's, and I'll talk about that in his preview in the coming weeks. But it's going to be interesting to see Cade's mindset with kind of more shooting around him and how that affects his scoring. But I still think he's the leading scorer no matter what, just because of usage and where his game's gotten to and efficiency. So that's my thoughts on Jaden Ivey. Really hot topic. There's so many differing opinions on him. I would love to hear all your thoughts about him in the comments. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you liked, I did in the first one with Asar have some film in here, but I've decided to take that away. If you like that, let me know. Just trying something new there. But please let me know your thoughts on Jaden Ivey and your answers to those 4 things I kind of went through. I'd love to hear back. Love all your support. But until next time, as always, go Pistons.